Now, to give some detail into what I've been promising you for a few days about a certain man. Well, when I was 11 years old, I read a book about him. Then when I was in graduate school, I read it again because I had to do outside reading for one of my history classes. Genghis Khan. Of all the world's great conquerors, this man was the only one who really truly rose from poverty and became a conqueror. Julius Caesar was a member of the most prominent family in Rome, and Alexander the Great, his father, Philip of Macedon, was the most powerful ruler in the Mediterranean world. So you can't say that those men rose from poverty. And Cyrus the Great, his grandfather, was the emperor of Persia. So again, you can't say these men rose from poverty. Genghis Khan was the son of a small-time Mongolian nobleman. When he was 10 years old, his father was poisoned. When Genghis Khan went back to his travel with his father, all the men left, and Genghis Khan was left to lead some women up until he was grown. He was captured and imprisoned for a while, but eventually released. But he managed to form the right alliance with the right person, and then do what the other Mongolian chieftains only dreamed of doing. To make a long story short, he conquered all of Mongolia and ruled all of Mongolia and had all of Mongolia under his thumb. Again, going into detail as to how he did it. He got one Mongolian chieftain on his side. With that chieftain, he got another one, and then he got another one. He had one thing in common with Attila Hun. Both he and Attila Hun had an older brother who kind of stood in their way, and they both killed their older brothers. Again, sometimes people like this is people like who managed to get to the top. But anyway, he got the Mongolians united. Then the people around him said, "You got to go to China. China has all this wealth. Besides, we know that China is militarily weak." Well, Genghis Khan at this point actually hesitated because he knew that China had millions of people. Well, finally he got his army of 100,000 men, and then, if I say 100,000, these were 100,000 extremely, extremely tough warriors. I mean, very, very tough. And they marched around the Great Wall, they marched up and down the Great Wall. And at first they put the Chinese to terror. But keep in mind, the Chinese did not consider it fashionable to join the army at this time. Now that's in this generation. And the Chinese militarily weak. But he went up and down the wall, and he noticed after a while the guard on the other side of the wall got less and less, and finally he picked a place on the wall where there was a gate, and nobody hardly guarding the gate anymore, so he and his men broke the gate down, and they had a breach in the wall. Then his entire horde of 100,000 or so men. Now, folk, in my teaching, I will say that most of the time the uncivilized beat the civilized. Now, Genghis Khan was what I'd call almost uncivilized. I mean, you can argue that. Fighting against people who are far more civilized. Most of the time, the uncivilized let their population decline. But this is one time where the Chinese outnumbered him by probably 20 to 1. I do strongly believe that Genghis Khan could have been whipped by a dynasty that had an interest in military and saw the need for keeping an army strong. If they could have gotten together a couple 100,000 men, twice as many, they had taken highly skilled, highly trained horsemen. I mean, these men who fought Genghis Khan, I mean, they were tough. Undoubtedly, they were hardened, they were battle hardened. Battle did not terrify them. They were tough, they were strong, and they were extremely fast on their horse, and they could fight from horseback better than most people can. But I do believe the Chinese could have fielded an army. Instead, the Chinese general committed suicide, realizing, hey, I can't stand up to this. And the fault really lay, I believe, with the emperors. But there was no significant army in China. The Mongolians overran much of China. Genghis Khan did not conquer all of China. That was left up to his grandson Kublai Khan, who finished the job that Genghis Khan started. But Genghis Khan did conquer a lot of China. Then Genghis Khan, keep in mind, China was huge. Genghis Khan turned his attention westward and went to the Muslim world. And there he began to just slaughter the daylights out of them, doing the same thing Attila the Hun had done. He said, God told me to. Each of you can make up your mind for yourself what you think about it. But one time, Genghis Khan went to a city, slaughtered all the inhabitants, his men pulled all the plunder they wanted and leave. Then he was told, sir, there are some people who are hiding in cellars and hiding in wells and hiding, and they've come out. And so Genghis Khan turned around and went back in unexpectedly and slaughtered the rest of them. Your book describes it just for the sheer fun of killing. But the only twang of conscience he had was he once turned to an aide and said, I wonder if these people here will remember what we've done to them. The only twang of conscience he ever seemed to experience. Your book describes how he really would enjoy, after killing all the men, hugging their women, and that he really got a thrill out of this, just for the sheer sake of killing. Again, he's been compared to Attila the Hun. In the Superman books one time, that Lex Luthor's Hall of Heroes included Genghis Khan and Attila the Hun. Not to mention Nero and a few other really, really bad people. Your dog named Nero, I know, yeah. A few other really, really bad people. But Genghis Khan went on into Western Europe. His armies conquered Russia, and they were destined to hold Russia for 200 years. And that's why there's an expression, scratch a Russian and you'll find a Mongolian underneath that Russian. But he went into Russia. But Russia served as a buffer between the Mongolians and Western Europe. Genghis Khan's army went to Poland and fought a Polish army, and regrettably, I don't know which side won. Do you know?
No, I don't.
But I do know
Polish
this.
are tough people.
I do know this, though, that when the battle was over, the Mongolian army got word that Genghis Khan had died, and they all went back to Mongolia at that point. But it was the one European army that engaged, but he put Europe to terror. Europeans were afraid that, Europe, we cannot really stand up to this man. I mean, well, to give you some idea how tough these men were, Genghis Khan's army would survive the trips across the cold mountains by opening up a vein in their horse or their mule or their donkey or whatever, drinking a little bit of blood from the vein and closing the vein back up again, waiting a day or two later, opening up the same vein, drink a little bit of blood. I mean, folk, these were people they were tough. I mean, pure and simple. And civilized persons could hardly stand up to them. But Genghis Khan died. Now, about where he died and where he's buried. When he died, he was buried someplace, we don't know where. And he had thousands upon thousands of horsemen gallop over the place to try to cover up any evidence of where he was buried. And these horsemen covered up, and the persons who knew where he was buried did not know this was going to happen, but they were killed immediately to where they couldn't reveal. So nobody knows where he was buried to this day. And also, we have hundreds, actually into the millions of Oriental peoples who still carry Genghis Khan's DNA. Take that for whatever it's worth. All right. Oh, yes. Again, he got to Persia. He got as far as Baghdad. He killed the caliph at Baghdad. But then a lot of them became less nomadic. They became civilized themselves. They took up farming. His grandson, Kublai Khan, he conquered the rest of China. Now, we remember Kublai Khan. I mean, I say we Europeans because it was during Kublai Khan's reign an Italian named Marco Polo traveled. He went all the way to China and got to the court of Kublai Khan. And Kublai Khan and they impressed each other. Kublai Khan was really glad to see these Europeans. And then eventually Marco Polo went back and wrote about what he saw. Some of what he wrote, apparently Marco Polo exaggerated. Very important, though, because Marco Polo's book influenced Christopher Columbus to try to get to China by sailing westward. Columbus believed that, well, since the earth is round, I mean, by his day, everybody knew that, I can sail westward to get to China. But he would have perished along the way had he not bumped into the Americas instead, because it was 15,000 miles from Spain to China going westward, and he did not know that the two big continents stood in his way. At least that's a standard story. Now again, I've read a lot of other stuff about Columbus. Kublai Khan also made an attempt to conquer Japan. Now under the Mongolians, China was able to reconquer Tibet, and they went in and reestablished a presence in Vietnam, but they couldn't survive long in Vietnam because, and we're going to talk about this when we come to the chapter on Vietnam come Wednesday, the Vietnamese used guerrilla warfare, and the Mongolians fought the same way the Muslims did, from horseback, and let's face it, that type of fighting does not do well in the jungles of Vietnam. So the Vietnamese eventually was proved to be more than he could keep. But he went to Japan. The kamikaze, now I'm not going to take responsibility for that spelling. I don't know if that's spelled right or not, but the kamikaze came up, which was a divine wind. And this stopped him from conquering Japan. Now, this word kamikaze we're going to run into again in our history lessons. When it comes to World War II, the Japanese used it as their last weapon. It basically means suicide bomber, or it means suicide missions. The Japanese would fly their airplanes right straight to the American ship while the ship was shooting at them, and hope the ship would blow up, but most of the time it didn't work because the Japanese pilots were highly drunk and the planes were hard to steer, and they landed harmlessly in the water. But they terrified the Americans when the Americans first saw them, because they would keep right on coming in spite of all the fire that was coming at them. But it was Japan's last desperate, when people resort to suicide missions, folk, it's like it's their last desperate attempt to win. But anyway, Kublai Khan built one of the greatest empires that China had seen. And then after him, well, the Mongols were destined, to rule for a while. All right, we're going to leave this and go to religion. Daoism and Buddhism threatened Confucianism. Buddhism was a foreign religion. Daoism was Chinese. Confucianism had to adapt itself to get its people back. So the Confucianism that came along for a while was the Neo-Confucianism. Now, I don't want to confuse, Neo-Confucianism never really caught hold in China either. They got in for a while. The Neo-Confucianists were followers of Confucius, but they tried to add a little bit or sugarcoat it up a little bit, but it didn't. Now, there was an attempt made to reconcile Buddhism with Confucianism. The attempt failed, owing to the fact that Buddhism emphasizes meditation, passivity. Confucianism emphasizes hard work and loyalty, and basically get out and get them. And you could not reconcile the two religions. They were just too different. Buddhism and Confucianism. The emperors would surround themselves with Confucian counselors, more so than Buddhist counselors. And I've already mentioned how that civil service exams were slanted towards Confucianism at the expense of Taoism. All right, now, but there's a couple of philosophers, though, that I don't remember. Chu Si. I mean, that's pronounced, I believe, according to the book, Chu Si. He was the one who expounded Neo-Confucianism. He advocated what he called the investigation. Investigation of things. Now, folk, at this point, I'm ready to sit in the sidelines and say, the Chinese are on their way. They're going to start investigating the world around them. They're going to learn, they're going to burst out. Well, the problem is, we don't know, and we can't go back and what do you mean by investigation of things? Well, when the philosopher came after him, investigated the bamboo plant and said, I get no spiritual high from this. I want to digress a little bit. We had an American scientist, George Washington Carver by name, who investigated the peanut plant and the soybean plant and came up with 100 different uses for both, some of which we still use. He invented peanut butter, he invented plastics from soybeans. George Washington Carver, of course, so hopefully those of you who know anything about him know he was a convinced Christian. But he did not do it to gain spiritual insight. He believed that you would gain spiritual insight by investigating. But again, what did he mean by investigation? I believe if George Washington Carver would have investigated the bamboo shoot, he might have come up with all kinds of bamboo food or bamboo plastics or whatever. I mean, you know, but anyway, along after him came along another philosopher, Yang Wangming. Yang Wangming said he stared for days investigating a bamboo shoot, and he said, I learned nothing from it. Again, his name was not Carver either, but I mean, anyway, he said he finally disagreed with Chu Si. Yang Wangming did a lot to ultimately bring down the practice of Neo-Confucianism, a religion, the philosophy of Neo-Confucianism, and turn the Chinese back towards Confucianism. Now, I want to say this about Chu Si. He is looked on as being number 3 among Chinese philosophers, behind only Confucius himself and Mencius, who followed Confucius. Then he collected all the books of philosophy that he could get. And put them together. Now, at this point, I'm going to side with him. I mean, I feel like I'm running out of time, but Chu Si wound up, well, he was being a scholar. They gave him a government position, he couldn't handle it. I mean, he was just too bright for the ordinary. So they finally made him like a professor, and they got him out of the way. But then he got back into politics again. He got into the court of the emperor, and he spoke out against the corruption he saw at the court of the emperor. Well, the emperor had him executed. And at this point, I might say, but the Chinese, it was the worst thing the emperor could have done, because 1,000 Chinese, keep in mind, that's a lot, 1,000 Chinese attended his funeral. They used to brave, because to attend his funeral meant that you were siding with him against the emperor. And 2 emperors later, he was made the top philosopher of his day. Again, you can compare it to Socrates, to Jesus Christ, or even Confucius himself. These men are not honored till after they're gone. After they're gone, they're made to be something really, really high. But he's more advanced. And again, as far as him speaking out against the corruption of the court, I've got to side with him. I mean, you know, I can't side with him in investigation. I mean, because what did he investigate, and what did he hope to gain by investigation? Well, he didn't know. But, all right. Now, we come to the big, big question now. The number one question I've thought about asking you as a essay question: why did China not advance to the top of the world during this time? And a lot of persons have blamed their philosophers. I think, now this is just me, that one of the problems they were united. In the meantime, all the way across the continent of Eurasia, 10,000 miles away, there was Europe, which was split into 200 or 300 different countries. 1 or 2 of those countries found a way. If China would have been split into 50 different countries with 50 different languages, one of them might have found a way. Now, what do I mean by the way? I mean, the book calls it the Chinese in search of the way, or in search of the way of freedom of expression, the way of freedom of thought, the way of letting people think for themselves. This is what China, as long as China was united, they were going to be squelched. That China would have been better off had it been split into 50 or so different countries. One of them might have found the way to a higher level of technology. In the West, you had a commercial class who took an interest in developing technology. No such class arose in China. China emphasized moral principles more than it did technological advances. Now, I want to say this about morality, folks. Some years ago, one of my kids said, "We don't have any rules here," and I figured that was almost a big compliment. Hey, I feel like I actually abide by a lot of life's rules, but morality is like the brakes on a car. If you make a car that has only brakes, how far are you going to get? Nowhere. Morality will keep you from going places you really don't want to go, but morality will not get you anywhere. The Chinese emphasize morality was like putting together a car with only brakes. So we got the best brakes in the world and no engine. Their morality, again, got them practically nowhere. You might say their car needed an engine, which Europeans eventually had and eventually developed. But no, they were very interested in morality. They were so concerned about becoming greedy. I used to read a magazine about how wonderful greed is. Greed has led to the development of automobiles, led to the development of light bearers, led to the development of air-conditioned rooms, led to the development of climate-controlled rooms. It's greed that leads to these things. And maybe it's one, but the Chinese were so afraid of becoming greedy that they eliminated their banks, eliminated their paper money, and eliminated any chance they had of developing any kind of an industrial complex. Also, they did not have a willingness to learn from others. Europeans learned from the Chinese, Europeans learned from the Muslims. In the 1780s, Lord Macartney, no relation to Paul McCartney, but Lord Macartney went to England to try to persuade the Chinese import of trade with Great Britain. The the emperor said, China needs nothing that Europe has, sent Lord Macartney home, and China was then to undergo 100 years of humiliation. That's more for second semester of world history. But all this led to China not advancing, falling behind, and the result was it was not the Chinese, and it should have been perhaps, and I'm saying this not being a Chinese person, the Chinese should have burst out from the seams, overspread the globe, built rockets, built spacecraft. They're doing that now. They went to the moon, went to Mars, could have, should have, but they didn't. They fell to the wayside. They let their ships rot, wouldn't settle the new world. So on and so forth. And there have been many books written on why was it okay, I'll say this, being of Western European descent, if you could have visited the earth but the year 1000, if you'd been an alien and looked at the earth at the year 1000, you'd probably have thought that Western Europeans were the most dirty, unkempt, dumbest people in the world. And I'm saying this being of European descent myself. But, visit 1,000 years later, your opinion would have changed. Okay, anybody have any further comments? Next time we'll take up with Japan, Korea, and Vietnam, 3 nations that we fought wars either against or with during recent history. Yes?
The Mongols and the Polish, according to what I've scanned quickly, they really didn't want to conquer Poland. It was more of a diversion to unite the other armies so they could invade Hungary.
Oh, Hungary, because they were related to the Hungarians anyway.
So it was a diversion so that the military strength went to Poland.
So really, it doesn't matter who won because they really weren't trying to win anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah,
okay. It was a diversionary tactic.
Okay, I get you, because they knew they were related to those Hungarians.
And that's my quick reading.
Okay, well, I knew they fought, and somehow I never did hear which side won the fight.
Well, according to that article, there were 2 in Polish invasions. But the young lady, you dropped your pens and pencils.
Okay.
there was no intent to